It's over. It's over.
Hey guys, what is going on this weekend? So, I wasn't really expecting to go much more into this weird story with this chick who murdered her kid. Obviously, or her 3 kids, I should say. I mean, it seems like just normie engagement slop. But what I think is interesting about it, here, I'm going to move this a little bit. Just 1 second here. There we go. So, what I thought was interesting about it wasn't really so much the facts of the case itself, which are strange. Well, I mean, not the facts of the case itself. I shouldn't say that. The reaction to the women, to what this woman has done, and the sort of bizarre scenes that you're seeing where they raised, I think it was like $700,000 for this woman her parents allegedly are in control of this fund, and then they're protesting in support of her outside of the courtroom where she's being tried. It's like this weird collective psychosis. And what was interesting about it was I was looking into the, I think it was Jodi Arias was the name of it. It was this woman who murdered her boyfriend and her child, I believe. And somebody had pointed out that, and the case I think was in like 2011 or something. And he said, what's weird about this recent case with this Lindsey Clancy woman is that the Jodi Arias case, when it happened, there was a huge reaction of hostility against the woman who committed the murders, Jodi Arias, by women. Like the women were actually more hostile than the men were. You know, the men were sort of doing that weird gooner thing where it's like, well, she's hot, so we're going to make memes about her. You know, that sort of thing, which is, by the way, why I don't dwell too much about women glorifying or idealizing serial killers that are attractive. Because it's like, yes, that is a thing that happens. Women do that, but men do it as well. So, I mean, if I were to point at women and say that they're uniquely terrible for this, it would be false. Because it's pretty much just a black pill reality that attractive people are going to be sexualized and fetishized, particularly if they are perceived as dangerous by both men and women. You know, that's not something that we can point as asymmetrically female. It just seems that way because there's a lot more men that tend to do this sort of thing than women. Like there's a lot more male serial killers, for example, right? But genuinely hot women who do shit like this, they usually get a male fan base as well. Like an I Can Fix or male fan base. So, but the point is, though, is that there was this big dichotomy, this big gap between how women reacted at the time to the Jodi Arias case versus how they're reacting now. And people are like, why is it that there's this difference? And I was like, well, it seems obvious to me. This is a generational difference. You know, like this is comparing older to middle millennial women to Gen Z women and younger millennial women. Because obviously this is also like the Lindsey Clancy fan base is extending into the 30s, which is around my age group, which are younger millennials, right? So, and what's interesting is that it's exposed all of these, I don't know what you could call them. It exposed these wounds that have been there since the beginning, and that there's been this sort of weird tension that has existed in the chud right between the men who are sort of, they're trying to appeal to women, and so they counter-signal any anti-woman stuff or anti-woman sentiment in the right wing with the goal of trying to appeal to them. Look how much we love you. Particularly in the racialist wing, I should say. This isn't necessarily the ones that are less focused on race. They tend to be less like this. But there was that faction, and then there was like the more overtly chud faction, which is the one I was sort of, when I've made videos, I've historically tried to appeal to this particular segment to try and explain to them that their political energy is being misguided by supporting this group, because this is who the leaders of this faction are. They're just not going to lead you anywhere productive. But they're starting to come to a head now, where you have like the alt trads, I guess you could call them, or the patriarchs, which are more neoconservative aligned. They're like the what's his name? They're like the Orrin McIntyre types, you know, the Blaze, the Daily Wire. These guys that are more vaguely pro-Israel, but they're also more conservative across the board versus the more ideologically and racialist, or ideological and racialist faction, right? Anyways, let me just, before I go on too long of a ramble, let me just catch up with the comment section here, the live chat. Certainly learned that, let me see here. The thing with the Lindsey Clancy case is that it shows women are either inferior to men and thus their rights should match their capabilities, or that the child murdered should get the death penalty. Well, no, see, this is an issue, and where I think part of it is just narcissism, where these women are just, because it's funny, if you look at, and I have some of the videos, I'll post them a little bit later, But you'll see these women doing these TikTok videos, and they're like having a temper tantrum. They're throwing ice at the wall. They're hitting the walls with foam bats and screeching and carrying on. But then you realize these women had to spend time like positioning their camera, setting up their camera, making sure the lighting fit, making sure that they were positioned correctly, that they were in the frame of the camera. So it's the idea that this was some kind of spur of the moment release of rage is nonsense. This is basically like choreographed acting on their part. So I think there is a very strong narcissistic element to it. But another one is it comes down to boundaries. It's women have a really hard time when it comes to rules and boundaries that are placed on them that are not directly related to their relational morality. Like the way that women interpret morality is through interpersonal relationships. This is what I was explaining in my video, Women in the Political. It's like on the one side, for example, let's just say you have a problem with adultery, okay? The way that a male-dominated society would deal with it is they would define this as a boundary violation, and they would make it illegal in order to protect that boundary. All right, so there's not really a direct emotional component tied to it. Whereas for women, it's more so about the harm that this does to the other person. Let's say the partner that has been betrayed. So a woman might oppose or find adultery in a personal context offensive. Like let's say that her friend gets cheated on because of the harm that it does to her friend. Or she might have, and let's be fair, let's not strawman. She might, and I'm saying this because I've seen this myself as well, where women will have moral dilemmas about discovering that a friend of theirs, let's say, is cheating on their partner. And they find it very difficult, like they consider it like a moral dilemma. Like I find this person's behavior really reprehensible, but she's my friend. Like the way that women approach that morality is it's about the effect that this has on the other person. It has nothing to do with the rules. So when you impose a rules-based system, and this is really the perfect test case for this woman's triple murder, because there's all of these psychological contexts that go into it that push all these buttons for these women, right? Because, childcare, especially right after birth, is very demanding. You typically don't get a full night's sleep for like months after a baby is born. And so it's very stressful, okay? And a lot of women empathize with that feeling of stress, and you can't really take it out on the baby because it's just a baby. It's just doing what a baby does. So it's like they get frustrated with the child, but they can't really react against the child. And so like you could see where women would have sympathy for the experience of being stressed after having a baby. And then and as a result, this creates this relational dynamic for them to this woman that makes the rule enforcement of like, if this was any other context, like if it was just like a man murdered his 3 children because, I don't know, he had some psychotic episode, or even just he was for some reason stressed about it. Like men would just say, shoot him in the head, right? Like that's like, this is just, we're going to set this as a rule. If you murder your own children, you're going to be shot in the head as a punishment. This is where you're directly colliding with these types of moralities. And it's interesting to see how it's fracturing this very tenuous political coalition that has existed, where you see all these you see all these men reacting to these women and their behavior towards this case. And then you're seeing these women say, I can't support the right wing anymore because they hate women. And it's because the men are reacting with disgust at these women, because the way that men are perceiving it as this is a moral boundary that we've imposed, and they want to violate this boundary, and this is why they're opposing this case. It's actually kind of ironic because it's also a case of where men are not really understanding how women process moral agency and moral behavior, because they're sort of thinking like a man would. It's like, why would a man, and I've seen people use Chris Benoit, which is somebody else mentioned him in the chat. Chris Benoit, in the as like a counterexample, like could you imagine men rallying around Chris Benoit or that other guy? Because I think there was Chris Benoit and then there was another one who murdered his 2 kids and his wife. And it's like, could you imagine men rallying around support for this man? Because if men were to do that, the implication would be they think the law is unjust. Not that they're in some way like emotionally empathizing with the man's decision. It's like that's the main reason men oppose laws, right? Is because they see it as producing an unjust outcome. Right? So it's kind of like imposing male psychology onto women in that regard. But it's interesting because this is exactly what I was talking about in my video on women in the political. This is where men and women collide in their construction of morality. And one side has to win, right? And what we've seen over time is that because women are more integrated into liberalism, like they're a much more consistent ally of liberalism. They have a much stronger affinity for it. The liberal system, like the political parties, are much more like they view women as a much more important political voting bloc than men, because they are generally like women have, I think, over 4 times the in-group preference of men. So it makes sense that like women will act collectively in like what they perceive as the benefit of women. And as a result, the whole system is organized around, it's like a ratchet. It ratchets up in one direction and it erodes these boundaries that men have imposed, which liberalism naturally is in tension with anyways, because the whole ontology of liberalism is we need to break down all of these barriers to self-actualization for the individual, because everything begins at the individual. Like there's no group that has any authority over the individual or collective authority over the individual. So it's interesting to see that this is starting to manifest, and you're starting to see these guys realize, I think in a lot of cases, I mean, we do have to identify the underlying emotional hook is like most of these guys are incels and they're not getting women anyways, and they're seething about that. Which is like, that's the motivation for their negative predisposition to women, right? It's not necessarily that they're thinking what I'm describing, but you are seeing them use this. They're starting to recognize this, and they're starting to use it politically as like, this is why we have to exclude women politically. Anyways, I'm going to read the chat a little more here. Let me see here. The only time I've seen were very online wrestling fans for Chris Benoit, who said the Florida wrestler did it. Very small and quiet minority that got ridiculed. Yeah, I mean, I've never heard of that. That's the difference, right? I've never encountered a group of men supporting a killer like that in any substantial numbers. You know, it also kind of reminds me of the when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. All of the and it was. There were a lot of women. I would say it's mostly women that were cheering about it on social media, which is interesting. Because like what I described, there's this weird tendency, I think, well, it's understandable, that men and women, or men tend to perceive women as being more sensitive, more empathetic, more understanding of other people. And what I would actually say is that this is very much strictly like their empathy, so to speak, is not really universal. It's very tightly bound to who they consider like their in-group, basically, right? Because again, you saw that like women can be quite vicious when they are dealing with men that they see as their enemies, right? And actually, what I would even say that women have a much poorer theory of mind than men do. And theory of mind is not the same thing as empathy. Theory of mind is more like empathy is an involuntary response to somebody else's emotions. You react to somebody else's emotions by feeling them and resonating with them. That's empathy. Theory of mind or cognitive empathy is about understanding, like being able to mentally construct a person's perspective that's outside of your own, and then infer what their behavior and preferences and psychology would be based on your reconstruction of them in your head. And I would say women are actually very poor at that, particularly with regards to men. I think men are also not great at it with regards to women, but it's pretty much equal. It's not like women are better at it than men are. Anyways, let me just read a little further down here. A very small minority that loved his work and will absolve him just because they loved his work. Let's remove his body of work and they won't be absolving him. I suppose what fascinated on how grown people can get their reality suspended by something so fake looking in the politics. I never watched Oh, this is about wrestling. Yeah, I can't really comment on that. What's up, Mercer? Hey, Wolf Slumber, how you doing? And this statistic is brutal. Oh, you're referring to the one that I posted up here. Yeah, this is interesting. And I will say that I think one factor that is causing this difference between men versus women under 30, first of all, you have to remember, it's looking at men under 30 and then women under 30 and then women under 25. We can probably infer from this that men under 25 are probably closer to like what women under 30 are for the opposite sex, when like positive or negative view of the opposite sex, given the pattern. So it's probably like 52%, 53% reports a positive opinion. That would be my suspicion. If we assume that the direction is the same for men and women, it might not be. But another factor here is that it's much more socially and even legally safe for a woman to express hostility towards men and negativity towards men than men expressing hostility or negativity towards women. So I think part of this, and there's a similar case where if you look at approval of miscegenation or mixed race relationships, if you go by what people say in America, it's like over 90% approval. Like, and in the youngest generations, it's even higher. But when you actually, there was a study that actually looked at the visceral response from people based on, I think it was like attention to eyes, or even I think it was even looking at brain activity. In terms of like whether this invoked a disgust response. And what they found is that for Americans, regardless of age and regardless of their own political affiliation and self-described acceptance, there was a very strong tendency to react to a mixed race couple with a visceral sense of disgust. Right? And it was also the same for gay couples expressing affection. So like two men kissing would produce a very strong disgust response in straight men. But this is regardless of whether the men identify themselves as being anti-homosexual, anti-LGBTQ or not. So some of this could be just people avoiding giving their actual preferences. It's like stated versus revealed preferences. So I actually suspect that this split is closer to 50-50 than we might see in terms of like anti-men versus anti-woman. Though I still do think women are probably leading it. I suspect that there's more women that are hostile to men than men that are hostile to women. And don't forget a huge amount of simps who support her decision to murder. See, this is another major problem with men, because, and this is like, for example, you notice this with whites when it comes to acting in our collective interest, is because when your movement is a sausage fest, which right-wing politics is, it's a sausage fest, pretty much always will be, because there's no boundedness, right? Like we can't sequester our own women the way that, for example, Muslims can. And as a result, we have no way of keeping them loyal to our side. And because obviously in a liberal system, why would any woman support imposing boundaries on her own behaviors, which is what nationalists and racial ideologues would require them to do. Why would any woman support that? Doesn't make any sense, right? So as a result, nationalism is pretty much always a sausage fest. And therefore, there's this strong impulse to try and appeal to women, because obviously men are attracted to women. They want to get a woman, and so they will mimic the politics of these women, or they will approve of the politics of these women to attempt to get sexual and romantic access to them, right? As like a reproductive strategy. And as a result, this is what I think is causing a lot of young men to, like, because you'll see, if you look at statistics, right, you'll see that young men generally are more right-wing than older men. Like, there is a trend to the right, but you still also see like a very strong 36, 37, even up to 40% of young men are still leftist and identify as leftist, and even far left, and like an anti-male left. And then you're like, well, why would they do this? Well, the only explanation you can come up with is that they're genuinely trying to get access to the women who are disproportionately represented on this side of the spectrum, right? And that's a huge problem, because men are the pursuers and women are the pursued. Like, when men are going to be the ones that are much more likely to do this than women, right? Like, nobody wants to be in a sausage fest, right? They want to be where the women are, just because it's just how men are, right? So it creates like a permanent weakness when it comes to that side of the political spectrum, the right wing. And some of the same people likely must have supported much worse things women have the power to be doing even before this. Yeah. When you break down all these barriers to women being able to whore themselves. Yeah, or, well, they don't even look at it that way. It's not even necessarily about whoring themselves, though they want the freedom to be able to choose that. It's mostly freedom of choice that they want, right? Like, the women that are most identified as liberals in the upper middle class, they're not the most promiscuous women. They're really not. Like, if you actually look at their revealed sexual behavior, it's actually, now I don't know if we can prove this, but I would suspect that women that self-identify as conservative probably are at least as sexually loose as women who self-identify as liberal. And I think the reason for this is because, if not more, and I would say the reason for this is because there's a class element to it, right? These women who are leftists are typically on the upper half of the class bell curve. And this is associated with higher IQ as well. Higher IQ is associated with more preference for sexual restraint, just as a personal preference, not as an ideological thing. So, like, these are the women that would, and I could tell you that this is something I've noticed. A lot of leftist women will support abortion as, like, something that needs to be critically defended, but most of them will never get an abortion themselves, and they never would personally get an abortion themselves. Maybe this is not true for Zoomer women, though. I don't know. I mean, Zoomer women are they're an interesting group of women, but at least for the older generations, millennials and older, like, most of the abortion signaling was just about the freedom to be able to have one, not that they actually would want one, even if it would benefit them in some way. You know, so it's about freedom at the end of the day, and eliminating boundaries. Again, it's like, for men, we can understand. We could sit down with powerful and attractive men and be like, listen, in order to maintain a society that functions coherently, we need to impose these boundaries and these rules on sexual behavior. And even though you are in a strong position to exploit the current situation, you can understand why, and we could explain the reasons why, in order to have a coherent society that isn't just chaotic and declining, especially against rival powers. You need to have an established set of social norms, including restricting the sexual behavior of men of your position. And you could probably get them to acknowledge that. Be like, you're right. That doesn't mean they would necessarily support it, because they might just say, well, yeah, but I don't really care about the society. I'm just going to do what I want. But they could at least acknowledge it, right? Whereas for women, they can't even really conceive of that. They don't really understand like impersonal logical boundaries like that. Like this is what I was describing before. If they can't relate to it personally, they just don't understand it. And it seems, and it's like all of these boundaries, even though you can make a logical argument for them, it will still feel arbitrary to them. Right? So it becomes a major issue. Like women will always be hostile to boundaries. Right? Well, I shouldn't say that because it's not like it's axiomatic, because women in previous eras were more conservative than men in terms of their voting patterns, but I think that was due to them perceiving the sexual environment as being scarce when it came to men. So they were more interested in preserving institutions that would prevent men from straying and from defecting and like dumping their marriages, whatever, or making it easier to access sex outside of marriage. In the baby boomer period, like there was a lot of resistance from women. Like men were the main drivers of the sexual revolution when it came to like breaking down monogamy, breaking down mores around promiscuity. It was largely the men that were the spearheads of this. The women actually reacted to it to a large extent. Like this is where second and third wave, well, particularly third wave feminism came from. It was largely a reaction to the sexual revolution because at the time, it was actually quite harmful to women. Like it pushed a lot of women out of their stable lives and into these chaotic environments. As a matter of fact, my grandmother is a personal example of this. That's the word I was looking for. My grandfather owned a rental property, and my grandmother had 3 kids, and she was a housewife, and he owned a few properties and managed them, including a pool house and a couple rental properties. And he just decided one day to get together with one of his female boarders who was renting a place from him, and booted my grandmother out of the house. And she was like basically thrown onto the streets, and she didn't have any experience in the workforce because this was in like the 60s and 70s. She didn't have any experience in the workforce. What was she going to do? And that did happen a lot in that period of time, with the liberalization of divorce laws, etc. Like a lot of men, because men were in the strong position at that time, they took advantage of it to a large extent. Now we're paying the price. Anyways, I'm going to catch up a little bit. I find the educated women claiming they don't support Charlie Kirk being killed, but they won't weep over it to change the framing, even though it shows a lack of empathy, like you said. Well, no, they won't support it because they know they're not supposed to. This is one of the things that really annoys me about liberal democracy or liberal societies, is that everybody has to pretend that existential categories don't exist. It's like the really refreshing thing about third world shitholes is that like you can go up to, let's say you're in Africa, you can go up to an African of one tribe and he'll be like actually, I have a personal anecdote about this. So I worked with a Tutsi once, who was he was at the same job I was. And I was talking to him about Rwanda, and he said, or no, he was from Burundi, actually. So he was not from Rwanda. He was a Tutsi from Burundi. And he said, we're just waiting for basically shit to go down, and then we're just going to kill everyone. Like, that's what he was saying. Like, we're going to just, ethnic warfare. And it was just the assumption. He was just sort of blasé about it. Like, yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're just waiting for shit to go down. And basically do the civil war in Rwanda 2.0, but in Burundi. And there's something really refreshing about that because it feels very honest, because we all know that this is what we want to express towards our enemies, but we have to pretend that we're all respecting each other's human rights. It's like, dude, all this bullshit is just a proxy. Like, as soon as our enemies are in the position where they can impose themselves unilaterally on us without worrying about us being able to retaliate through the institutions, they're just going to do it. You know, like, and of course they would. Why wouldn't they? Like, that's why they're expressing so much joy about Charlie Kirk getting shot in the neck. I mean, I remember when it first happened, I was like, to be honest with you, I mean, I wasn't crying any tears for him. I'll put it that way. Because I saw him as basically a fraud and a shill. So I wasn't broken up at all, but I did become increasingly disturbed when I was seeing their reaction. And then again, that's what they do. They'll say, "Oh, well, I'm not saying we should shoot people, but he's an evil person, so we need to we're fine with mocking his death and ridiculing his death." You know? And it's interesting because when you have an existential separation like that, where you have these two groups and they understand on some level that they represent an existential threat to each other, and that eventually, like, they're going to collide and one group is going to have to destroy the other completely. Like, basically it's like war, preceding war between two groups. What humans will do is, in order to prepare themselves psychologically for this, and by the way, I'm not saying this is literally what would happen. I'm saying, like, this is the psychological process underlying it. Preceding a existential conflict like a war, you have to dehumanize the enemy. And you do that by recruiting these other domains. And that includes, like, this person is evil, morally evil. And, like, what you're really seeing, and actually this is something that I've seen in Canada with Indians, right? With Indians, there's a major existential hostility under the surface from pretty much not just whites, but pretty much everybody who's not Indian is really hostile to Indians right now because they see them as a threat to the future of the country. Like, Indians will take over the country demographically and politically. And everybody knows this. And they know that once they do that, we're going to lose our country. We're going to lose control of it. And as a result, there is this existential political hostility towards Indians as a group. And what they do is they recruit all the negative stereotypes and, like, things that have emerged out of India to justify their hatred, to justify their political hatred. And so it's like, they're disgusting, they're rapists, they're like incapable of running a country, they're scammers, like, it's all this stuff. And while there's truth to it, like, it's very much exaggerated. And look, I hate having to defend Indians, but it is true. It's, to a large extent, if you actually look at the crime rates of Indians, I mean, if you compare them to other groups, they're not the worst group on the planet. Doesn't mean that they should be here. I mean, I'm the one saying that they represent an existential threat to Canada. On that basis, I would say we need to oppose them being here. But what I see happening is they're recruiting these other elements. And you're seeing the leftists and women doing this as well. Like, that, because they can't just say that we view men as we view white men, for example, if we're talking leftists, we view white men as an existential threat to our political sovereignty. We need to eliminate them as a group in order to dominate politically. They can't say that because that's not allowed in liberalism. So in order to justify their political hatred, they have to come up with justifications. They have to say, well, he's evil. Look at these evil positions that he has. He's a morally evil person. And we are fulfilling a moral campaign by eliminating. And this is why they call them all Nazis, by the way. Right? Like, it's everybody, like, whenever somebody gets assassinated who's some kind of conservative, you'll see people saying, well, he was a Nazi. And the implication is, if he's a Nazi, he deserves to die. Like, we're justified in killing him, right? There's a reason for that. That's the underlying logic, right? The crazy thing about Kirk is that he's the most milquetoast conservative possible, literally builds his whole persona to be inoffensive, and they talked about him like he was Mussolini. Well, that's the reason why, you know? And you do see this to some extent with the right wing as well, where they will get carried away with how they categorize people. Like, it is just simply a fact that, for example, when we're describing women as a group, like just in this case with the Lindsey Clancy case, where you see women that are cheering and supporting her and donating money to her. Okay, it is simply a fact that there is a bell curve that exists among women. If we want to think of like the kind of people that would support Lindsey Clancy, not every woman is part of that bell curve that supports Lindsey Clancy, right? Like that's a certain slice of that bell curve, right? And there's probably, it's not the majority either. It might be maybe a third or less, right? And we can logically say that. But the right wing sees these women as a political threat, and they want to, there's just this natural instinct to take things and collapse them into, this is a category we need to define as our enemy in a really clear way. It's like, well, if we just define women as a group as our enemy, instead of trying to be granular about it, where it becomes impossible really to draw the line, then we can then pursue our political hostility towards them. Like that's the logic behind it. These Indians deserve it tenfold. Well, I mean, I understand why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, I would do the same thing if I were them. They're still an existential threat, right? They're still an existential threat to my country. So, but again, ironically, the problem is that if I were to explain, I can explain what which is basically like Schmittian politics, where it's like, okay, there's a group of people, they control a territory, and they're being threatened demographically and politically by this outgroup migrating into their country and taking advantage of their political system, this liberal government system that sees them as a coalition ally against their own majority population. Okay. That is, like for me, when I recognized that this is where my hostility towards Indians was coming from, it actually diffused a lot of it, because I realized that it's not like I'm seeing these people as like they're exactly as I'm imagining them. It's more like I recognize them as a political threat, and I'm trying to weaponize all these other elements to further justify hatred towards them, you know? Whereas if you just say that it's a political conflict, it becomes a lot more simple. It's like because it doesn't matter what their actual characteristics are. We would apply this heuristic to any other outgroup that was coming in large enough numbers to threaten our sovereignty, right? So. But isn't the government always siding with Jeets? If so, how are you going to fix it? Well, that's the problem, right? Is that we have a political system where like the majority population is seen as the main threat to the government, because in liberal logic, it shouldn't be possible. Like it's a moral fault if a population becomes collectivistic over its interests. Like if a population forms a friend-enemy grouping based on what they perceive as an existential threat. Now, my position is that this is just human nature, and actually this is what empirical psychology and sociology has demonstrated, right? I made a video on that. But for liberals, they assume that all humans start as individuals, and this kind of attachment to a group is a sign of a mental pathology, right? So as a result, when they see their own populations organizing in this way, they see it more like there's this mental sickness in the population, or this moral evil in the population that needs to be suppressed. And we can bring in and marshal these immigrants to join us in suppressing this population. And of course, it's overwhelmingly men. Not all men, and also it's not like all women are siding with the liberals, but it's like a 70-30 split or 60-40 split, right? And that's the problem, is that like you can define the problem or define the scenario, but I don't really see a clear way out of it. It does kind of lead back to like another thing that you're seeing making the rounds is all these guys posting, we need to repeal the 19th Amendment. We need to repeal women's right to vote. That'll solve everything. Like, kind of, but not really. Because the reason why women got the right to vote in the first place was because it was like a long chain of expanding the franchise from the very beginning. From the very beginning, only, I believe it was only aristocrats could vote in elections. And then it expanded to men that own property, men of good moral standing in the community that own property. Then it expanded to men in general. and then it expanded to women. And in America, it expanded to men in general, then it expanded to black men, then it expanded to women, right? Like, it was a process unfolding because this is something Robert Dabney talked about. I don't know if he really identified it exactly as such, but the problem when you have a franchise, there's going to be a temptation for the liberal side of the system, like the liberal party in the system, to push to expand the franchise to more people, because that the liberals can then look at this newly enfranchised group as their natural allies because they enfranchise them. So, as I said, like, if you go from landowning men to men in general as the voting bloc, well, if you're the liberal party that is trying to expand your voter base in a sort of bottom versus the top way, expanding the franchise to these men means that you've just created a huge block of political support in your democratic system. And if you're the conservatives, or the right wing, if you oppose enfranchising these people, what happens if you lose and they get enfranchised? Well, they can see that you opposed enfranchising them. At that point, then they're automatically going to be hostile to you in elections. So this creates a situation where conservatives or the right wing in a democratic system are always going to be extremely hesitant or just refuse to oppose expanding the franchise, right? And once we've expanded the franchise to everyone above the age of 18 or 18 and older, well, what's the next step? And I think mass immigration is really the next step of this process, where you not only have the expanded franchise to all these groups that are going to support your liberal faction, but now you can start importing populations that will support you politically. And they're obviously going to be enfranchised as well. And again, it's the same logical process. The right wing is terrified of alienating these immigrants by opposing immigration. Like, this is the problem that we have in Canada. And this is why it kind of makes it impossible. And it's also why you can't just go back in time a century and go back to when women were not enfranchised, because you haven't resolved this underlying pressure towards expanding the franchise and then importing new voters in after the franchise has been expanded. You haven't resolved this underlying tension. The only way to do it, and this is the reason why I was fairly optimistic about Brazil, and I still am, is you need to just eliminate democracy. You need to have a political or military dictatorship. That's the only way to do it. Like, once you eliminate democracy, and as a matter of fact, here's a hot take. It doesn't even matter what political faction abolishes democracy. Like, it can be the most radical leftists, it can be the most radical right-wingers, it can be religious theocrats. It doesn't matter who abolishes democracy, because once the state is no longer subject to democratic influence and voting, and it's able to act separately from the population and impose its will on the population, it naturally conforms to a certain type on the basis of its own self-interest, right? And you see this pattern with all the dictatorships that started out as radical libtard dictatorships, and they all, without exception, evolve into an authoritarian patriarchal state. Okay, you saw this with the Soviet Union. With the Soviet Union, if you look at the early Soviet Union, it was extremely radically liberal. They basically made divorce, or they abolished marriage effectively by making divorce extremely easy to access. They massively expanded contraception and abortion to enormous levels, and there was abortions all over the place. They promoted a culture of sexual libertinism. There was STDs spreading all over in the 1920s in Russia. Again, because they abolished all of these social norms. Well, when Stalin came in, and the Germans represented an existential threat on their border in the 1930s, you saw a radical reversion of all of these liberalizing elements. Suddenly, divorce was tightly restricted again, and you saw abortion getting tightly restricted. You saw the return of a patriarchal kind of nationalism, even if they didn't identify it as such. I mean, if you look at Soviet murals and Soviet mosaics, Soviet monuments. Like if you were to remove the hammer and sickle, they would look almost identical to something out of Nazi Germany. Just because you'd have like this blonde-haired, square-jawed, masculine-looking man carrying the hammer and sickle, and then he has like a Chinese guy on his by one side, and then a Central Asian guy on the other side. But he's like, the Russian is in the front and center, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, square-jawed Russian. Like it reverted to a certain type. The same thing happened in China. China started off as very radical when it came to their reforms. They were less sexually libertine, but they were more like, they really attempted to impose or completely destroy gender norms. So like men and women were forced to dress identically. They worked identically. Like they abolished basically all gender differentiation. And this was during the Maoist period. But then once Mao died, and then the Gang of Four that replaced him were deposed, and Deng Xiaoping came in, you saw a reversion to a more patriarchal form of Chinese statecraft. Now China, I'm not saying that China is like some kind of Saudi Arabia or anything, but by East Asian standards, it's a patriarchal state. Like the Chinese state is able to impose its interests on Chinese women, or at least attempt to. Not necessarily that it's successful all the time, but if you compare what the Chinese state is doing versus like Japanese, Korea, South Korea, or even conservative European democracies like Hungary under Orban, like the Chinese were actually imposing restrictions on Chinese women in terms of accessing divorce. They were making divorce harder. And they're going to start imposing penalties on women who refuse to get married. They can do that because they're a privileged state. They don't have to worry about women voting. And any state that is sovereign and that is interested in its own survival is going to recognize it needs to prioritize men, and particularly young men, over women. Because men are who you use to defend your borders of your state and to police the state internally, and also to protect the government within that state from being deposed by a competing dissident force, right? So the bottom line is, this is what you need to do if you want a patriarchal state. Even the radical leftists, the DSA leftists, I don't think that they're actually dictatorial in their ideology. But I mean, if the radical left, like if like a Maoist movement arose in the US and they overthrew the government and they started to do crazy commie shit, it would suck for a long time and it would potentially be catastrophic. But inevitably, the government that would emerge out of that would follow the same pathway as a government like China, out of necessity, because that's just how states act. It's a rational thing. It's not that the state loves men or it loves patriarchy. It's that it's the rational actions. And by the way, I remember when I was talking about Iran, it's kind of, the Iran situation has kind of devolved into this really low level, it's just sort of, like they're blockading each other, and the U.S. is hoping that Iran will collapse economically before it faces severe economic problems, especially going into the midterms. Like that's the current standoff. There's nothing really exciting happening, but if you've been paying attention, you're hearing reports that Mojtaba Khamenei, the current supreme leader, that there's severe problems with trying to communicate with him, or he's in some severely incapacitated state. You're hearing stuff like that. I remember saying that I suspect that when the attack happened on Ayatollah Khamenei, that eliminated that supreme leader category effectively, and the IRGC took full control of the country. And now Iran is more like a military junta than like a theocratic state. And ironically, I think that over time, regardless of how, I mean, if Iran has to win this thing in order to remain sovereign, assuming that they win in a way that they are able to remain sovereign and project their power, I predict that Iran will actually become less religious and more secular. Their government, I mean, will become less religious and more secular, but simultaneously, it will become more authoritarian towards women and more patriarchal and patriotic concerning Persian civilization. it will start to converge with these other states, because I think the theocratic element was causing it to behave in sort of eccentric ways when it came to this. Like Iran's liberalism towards women was mostly in the economic sphere, like opening the universities to women. That happened under the Islamic Revolution. That was not a thing under the Shah. Universities were open to women under the Islamic Revolution, and so were workplaces. White collar workplaces. I would predict, if Iran is under the control of the IRGC and the religious element becomes weaker and weaker, you're going to see more and more conservative social impositions on women, which is interesting because this would be the exact opposite of what most people would predict. But we'll have to see. But that's my suspicion. South Korean men will probably be happy North Korea takes over South Korea. Why fight for a country that hates you? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think North Korea has to even do anything. Because South Korea is just committing suicide demographically, right? They just have to wait a couple decades. And actually, the North Korea is not what it was 20 or 10 years ago. Like, it's become a lot more, like, they do have power now in Pyongyang, all right? And they do have electrification, right? They're not as backwards as they used to be economically and technologically, but the government is intact, right? So we could actually see a time period in a couple decades where the North Koreans actually surpass the South Koreans. I wouldn't say it has anything to do with communism, though. I would say it's purely to do with, what I was describing. Like, there's no real communist state anymore. It's not like any of these countries believe in dialectical materialism. You should talk to Haz al-Din of the American Communist Party. See, the problem is that, because I remember watching Haz al-Din debate with Keith Woods and whatever the hell that guy's name is, the Australian guy. I watched them debate fascism versus communism, or National Socialism versus communism. And it just became obvious that, like, they have these liberal priors that you can't really get away from, because the communists, they ultimately don't believe in collective identities, right? If you actually look at how communism functions in practice, or not in practice, in ideology, like they start from an individual man is being alienated from the wider society due to the labor relations. And this alienation would be resolved by seizing the means of production and socializing production. Like, it's stuff like that. And like, when you introduce intergroup conflict into this scenario, they don't really have a way of dealing with it. Because I remember that they were talking about, like, what happens when you have these two mutually hostile ethnic groups occupying the same liberal state, and because they're mutually hostile to each other, they are going to vote against each other's interests, and this will benefit liberals at the expense of socialists. You know, because obviously this is one of the things that happens when you have diversity, is support for welfare, support for social safety nets goes down in the population. And they had no response to it because they don't have a coherent way of dealing with intergroup conflict. Right? I do like them, though. I do have a respect for them. Because at least they're trying something different. You know, they're not just going with like race and IQ or socialist democracy. They're actually trying to create their own ideology, which is interesting. Though I think, ironically, as I said before, if you actually look at the demographics of people who support mega communism versus America First, they're pretty much the same people. It's just that the America First faction identifies with white men, and the mega communist faction is composed of men who do not identify with white men, and who identify with either their own group or like some more broad, vague third worldist, basically like an anti-white man position. That's really what it comes down to. Fundamentally, demographically, they're the same thing. It's overwhelmingly men, young men, dispossessed young men, who feel like they're being excluded from the society and marginalized. It's the same group fundamentally, but it comes down to the where they conceive of their identity, right? Interesting how in Iran, liberalism and women's liberation came with Islam. Well, there's nothing in Islam that says that women can't perform the same jobs as men. Like if you actually look at the Quran, what it says is if the woman is able to complete her domestic duties to her family and her husband, she can go and work and earn an income, and the husband is not entitled to it. But the wife is entitled to part of the husband's income. It's actually in the Quran directly. So in some ways, the Quran is a little bit long-housed. Soviet Union addressed the ethnic issues by giving them their own republics. Well, there's a problem with that, because you know what else they did? They didn't just give them their own republics. They also mass migrated Russians into those republics to dilute them demographically. Most notoriously in other Eastern European countries like the Baltic states. And they also transferred populations all over the Soviet Union. As a matter of fact, the inspiration for the blockbusting policy that the American government took up to break up ethnic neighborhoods in America in the 60s and 70s, like where they would move a black family, they would have a white family buy a house in, say, a Polish neighborhood, and then the white couple that was posing as the buyers would then transfer the house's ownership to a black couple, and then the black couple would move in, and the problems that you would imagine would happen, and it would cause white flight, and this would drive the like this Polish community. They would start fleeing, selling their houses and fleeing to the suburbs. And the strategy behind that was, if we can break these ethnic neighborhoods that are composed of a single ethnic group in each neighborhood, and we can push them into the suburbs, they will then be distributed in patches all across these suburbs, all mixed together, and then within a generation or two, they'll just be generic white Americans, instead of being attached to a particular ethnicity. And actually that worked. That was a correct strategy from their point of view, because it did. That is what happened. Like, with the exception, I think, of Italians and maybe a couple other smaller groups in the Northeast, pretty much all of these ethnic neighborhoods got destroyed, and their descendants are now all mixed together. This is where you get like the Amerimut meme, right? They got that idea from the Soviet Union. They got that idea because the Soviet Union would transfer problematic populations, whether it was the Koreans in Central Asia, or it was the Chechens in Dagestan. They would move them to other parts of the Soviet Union or Central Asia, or it was Ukrainians. Like, you'll find even today, if you look at these post-Soviet republics like Kazakhstan, you'll find that there's like these little tiny percentages of all these weird ethnic groups, like Ukrainians, Tatars, and Dagestanis of various kinds. And you're like, how the hell did they even get there? And it's because in the Soviet Union, they would transfer populations around to try and dilute national sentiment. Right. Most importantly, the eastern part of Ukraine, there was a massive transfer of Russians into that part of Ukraine, because they wanted to demographically take it over. You know, it was far less demographically dominated by Russians before the Soviet Union. The American elite will never allow America to peacefully balkanize. That is true. It's just so valuable to have America intact the way it is that there's no way that they can allow it to separate. Because if they allowed America to separate into even just two countries, that would immediately allow for foreign powers to ally themselves with one side over the other. And this is one of the reasons why the Civil War was, from the American point of view, was necessary. They absolutely had to eliminate. They had to eliminate this competing power because the British, for example, were supporting the Confederacy. And the Confederacy would have become a British client on the continent against the rest of the United States. It would have just been, they wouldn't have been able to become what they became. So, definitely. You deal with ethnic conflict in America by giving blacks the Bible Belt, natives Oklahoma, and the Dakotas. Well, it's easy to say, but how do you implement that in practice? Like, as I said, there's, like, balkanization is just not going to happen. If it did happen, it would be the end of America as a superpower. Because even if the successor state was, like, 70% of the size of the current America, if they don't control the whole landmass, they would be dramatically weaker. Especially if the successor state that broke off from them is hostile to them. Because they would then have a permanent enemy right on their borders. It would just not be, it would not be feasible for them. Or, like, if they were, like, they would never allow that voluntarily. There's Ukrainians in Vladivostok, the city near Japan. Yep. I mean, the Ukrainians were migrated all over the place. A lot of them after World War II, because there was a lot of pro-German sentiment in Ukraine. They even tried to do this with Jews, where they found, like, this. They created this Jewish autonomous republic in the middle of Siberia, and then they were hoping that Jews would go live there. Like, sure. Yeah. Anyways, I'll pull up the examples that I was talking about, the copycats. Hang on just one second here. So, this woman here, mother slits throat of her 3 children, told her father, say goodbye to your kids. And then there was another one that was actually a direct, this woman poured, it's not funny, it's horrifying. This woman in a TikTok thing, this woman poured wax over her children and then set her house on fire. Hang on, let's see here. She was arrested for child abuse and arson after filming herself starting a fire in her kitchen and pouring hot wax on her child. Now has an ice hold. I was saying, like, when I first saw this one happen, I was like, I don't think this was ideologically motivated. This is just a Latina. A monkey lady put her 2 kids in an oven over a year or 2 ago. Yeah, I mean, the issue isn't really that this happens, because it just does, because people will do psychopathic things, including women. It's the reaction to it that's the issue, right? And actually, there's something I wanted to point to. Let's see here. Oh, here's some of the other videos of these women acting like lunatics. Just a second here. See, you just think you get a thin mid woman and you're like, wow, she wants to have a baby. Oh my God, my life is finally starting. And then she posts shit like this on TikTok and you realize, oh fuck. Oh fuck, now I'm married to this. No, but I mean, it's funny. You could tell that this was all performative, right? Like, she had to set up the camera. She had to make sure that she was in the position. She had to freeze all the ice, and then she started to throw it and do hysterics. I actually remember a similar thing happening when Roe v. Wade was overturned. There were all these women just absolutely losing their fucking minds. Actually, I think I have some of those videos. Let me pull them up. Let's see here. Yeah. Okay, sorry about the ear rape there. But I remember this was from the Roe v. Wade thing. There's a bunch of women losing their fucking minds. Yeah, there's people eating dinner in the floor beneath me. So, Dashboard is in the chat. Well, I would love to talk to hell by the dashboard. Tell us more about life in North Korea, Mercer. Well, I don't know much about life in North Korea. I do know that things are improving. You can even just tell by looking at the satellite map at night, because they're far more illuminated now than they were in the past. If you remember that famous meme photo of North Korea versus South Korea, where South Korea was massively illuminated and North Korea had almost nothing. It's not that way anymore. North Korea does actually have some power generation now. So, Digital Ghost is using a Diablo 2 box cover art for his PFP, and I can respect that. Things are improving in North Korea because they are importing stuff from China. Well, I think it just comes down to them being, I mean, what's the Korean IQ? It's like 105. I mean, it's under pretty much any political system. Doesn't mean, like, some systems are better than others for development, but if your population is intelligent enough, inevitably they will develop beyond, like, total poverty, right? And I think that's what's happening, is that North Koreans, they do have economic connections to China and Russia, and through that they are developing, albeit they're still quite poor. People living in goon caves in Toronto. I do not live in Toronto. Help by the dashboard light. Can you explain to me why you have a problem with me? Because I've never interacted with you personally, but you seem to greatly dislike me, and it's very strange. Because if there's something that you disagree with me on, I would be happy to debate with you over it on a group call, maybe someone's stream like Thomas White. But if you're just going to seethe about me, especially when I'm not there, like, that's kind of cowardly. Anyways. As I was saying, there's another thing I wanted to look at here. I got to scroll down a little bit because my bookmarks are in the opposite order. Come on. You're the Dark Wanderer. Why does Mercer make so many people seethe? First it's Tails and now... I have no idea. I don't know, man. It's annoying because I don't mind when people seethe. And as a matter of fact, I like that Tails will directly interact with me. And he will try and argue with me. He will go back and forth. He will like try and refute my points. I'll respond to them. Sometimes I concede with him on certain things, or I will push my own conclusion back a little bit and give him credit for an area where I overstated my case. Right? I don't mind that. Anyways, just give me a second here. Oh yeah, this is another one that's kind of funny. Oh wait, hang on. This is one, okay. Here's one that I wanted to read about. So, this is talking about, Ricardo Duchesne's one of my favorite writers. And he's trying to, I don't necessarily agree with him on everything, but he's trying to explain what is going on psychologically with women. I'll distill it a little bit, but this is a good post. It says here, Melissa Wong accurately points to the disintegration of female purpose in our modern societies, which has made women believe that their unhappiness or sheer everyday difficulties in this progressive society demonstrate that they are still oppressed as mothers. But then Wong focuses on personal choices or gives the impression that these women just need to be personally condemned and things will shape up. We need a structural analysis as to why so many women are personally becoming this way at this point in time. My view is that limbic capitalism and woke liberalism are selecting women like this for decades now. What he means by limbic capitalism is how the market is oriented towards feeding people's immediate desires, whether it's lust, consumerism, any kind of emotional content. Like the X is a really good example of this. This is something I talked about, how one of the problems I have with X is that it will naturally feed into things that you react to. And typically we react to negative things more strongly than positive things. Like you're going to interact with, even if it's in a hostile way, with something that's negative. And this can become a confirmation loop. And it can produce a lot more intense hostility than is warranted for what's actually going on. And what he's saying is that this is the variation of capitalism we have now. It's different from like production capitalism, like Fordist capitalism, where you're just producing goods and selling material goods, because that's kind of been superseded, especially in Western countries. Like that's not what we do in Western countries. We import those goods from other countries. So what do we produce in our own countries? Well, financial sector, healthcare, the tech sector. What's the tech sector driven by? It's driven by anything that creates engagement, right? Like X is now a more profitable platform than it ever was under Twitter. But I would say it's actually far more socially harmful than Twitter was, even under the libtards. Because Twitter, under the libtards, it was extremely tightly policed and it was ideologically enforced. But it sort of acted the same way that like a communist era apparatchik publishing a newspaper of some kind, like a Pravda or whatever functioned. Like you knew that it was an ideological mouthpiece, so there was little credit. Like you could dismiss the stuff in it. It wasn't particularly important in that regard. It was more important for ideological conformity. Whereas nowadays with X, it's like, you know, if you're particularly sensitive to, for example, the gender war stuff, you are going to get fed tons of that shit. And people will deliberately engineer their posts to be as inflammatory as possible in order to go viral, because there's a material incentive now. So that's what he's describing with limbic capitalism, is that it's trying to profit from your instincts effectively, especially your negative and more base instincts. Anyways, capitalism in our times prefers women who seek freedom, consumer pleasures, and careers rather than stable families with strong community links and lower market interactions. That's what I talked about in my economics video, right? Liberalism has eroded the ideal of motherhood as a central vocation for women. Diversity and race mixing have broken apart family and ethnic continuity. Barely anyone has any substantive link to any heritage, rituals, obligations, and customs. What are those? Those are boundaries, right? Women have been told they need liberation from their biological role as mothers and that raising children is an unfair burden. Everywhere they look, they are told that traditional roles as mothers with children are confining and boring, keeping them away from careers and vacations, and lowering their youth and sexual appeal at the same time as the world around them is devoid of communities and big families. There's no way out of this. I think he's putting a little too much on the role of social media influence on that, because I don't think that this would work if there was no underlying hook to it. Like, a lot of women don't want to be mothers and stay-at-home moms and trad wives, because it's just not a why would you want to do that where you're subject to a man and children, and you're no longer the central person in your life? Why would you want that? A lot of women don't. I can't really blame them. Psychologically speaking, I can't blame them. Anyways, I'm gonna catch up on the chats. Mercer, did you believe nobody would care about the child killer if she was better looking and younger? That could play a role. That is a psychological mechanism that affects everyone, not just women. Like, for example, I think that the alt-right would be a lot more hostile to Andrew Tate. They would be a lot less hostile to Andrew Tate if he was not a mulatto descended from a black man and white woman. I think that's part of the reason why they dislike him. Now, they probably would still dislike him, but the dislike is much more total on the racialist right because of his race. And if that factor wasn't there, it would probably be less explicit. They would probably still dislike him for being anti-trad or whatever, but it would be more along the lines of like Nick Fuentes' dispute. And women operate in a similar fashion, though they don't really, again, they don't think in terms of in-group, out-group. They think more about intrasexual competition, right? So. The white couples helped blacks buy houses. Yeah, they were actually whites. As a matter of fact, they were Quakers. The blockbusting operation was a Quaker Jewish operation. And the Jews were the ones who suggested it. It was actually, I forget the guy's name. He was a Stalinist who was a New Dealer in the New Deal regime. And he became an advisor to, I forget what his name was. Because this was like a government-directed project. But like he was the Jews were the ones who suggested it. The Quakers were the ones who put it into action. They were on the ground actually operating to break up these neighborhoods because the Protestants saw these Catholic ethnic communities as a political threat. Because there was a time when Protestants, Catholics, and Jews were like three separate groups competing for influence in America. It wasn't just like whites versus blacks versus Jews. It's interesting since I looked at the source code and X's algorithm changed from being a hard-coded function to now being dictated by Grok, which makes it more abstract. When you say abstract, do you mean it's do you mean that it's more like it's more subject to change through input by users, I mean, whereas the previous one was more strict in how it would filter out content? That's what I'd imagine. Wimping like a hurt dog is all the white man can do at this point. Well, I would say, and this is a point I brought up because I had this conversation with a guy in my DMs, and it was interesting. Because he was a black American guy, so I was trying to phrase things in a way that made sense to him, and I asked him, When was the last time that you could identify an explicitly white male collective political grouping? And I told him, like, you're not going to like the answer, but the answer was Jim Crow South. The Jim Crow South, there was explicit boundaries between blacks and whites, and particularly boundaries placed around the sexual behavior of white women. And this allowed for the men to exist as a political grouping, because in order to exist as any kind of political group or collective identity, you need to be able to reproduce that population. If you cannot control who your women are choosing to reproduce with, you're not a sovereign group, and men won't identify with that group because they'll see it as the losing group. Because in every situation where that happened historically, it meant that the dominant group conquered the other group and dissolved their boundaries over their women. That's pretty much the only time that would ever happen. And so in the Jim Crow South, where there was anti-miscegenation laws, there was active opposition politically to civil rights. As a matter of fact, they had to, the Eisenhower government had to pull in the military to force desegregation in Little Rock, Arkansas. And what's critical, if you look at those photos, and they're quite famous photos of the soldiers pointing their bayonets at American protesters, there was a lot of women there. It was men and women, white men and white women. And, of course, they lost that conflict. Eventually, civil rights won. And another factor that's critical, if you look at the case that made miscegenation legal, it was Loving versus Virginia. And what was important about that case is that it involved a white man with a black woman. Now, why would they deliberately choose that? Well, they actually were conscious about it because they were writing about it at the time. I mean, the political activists that were trying to decriminalize miscegenation. They said that this, specifically using a case of a white man with a black woman, would diffuse the hostile reactions from white men that would come from using an example of a black man with a white woman. Like, they actually explicitly said that. They understood this. They understood that the boundaries around white women were actually very critical and were very sensitively felt concerning the political identity of white men in the Jim Crow South, like the Southern Democrats. And then what happened after civil rights and desegregation and the elimination of anti-miscegenation laws passed? After they eliminated all that and they completely desegregated the South, well, whites have ceased to exist as a political group in America. They've just lost consistently since then, and they've never been able to fight back in any serious way. If you actually look at their, you'll see individual cases, like weird cases like Ruby Ridge, and you'll see like individual attacks like the Unabomber, for example. But in terms of like a mass political movement, whites have effectively just been incapable of marshaling and mobilizing opposition in a collective way. And that's because they just don't have those boundaries. That political identity doesn't exist anymore. Right? Yeah, Loving versus Virginia is way too on the nose. Yeah, I remember hearing something about how that was actually set up deliberately. That it's kind of like the Rosa Parks thing. Where I think the whole thing was actually staged. Like, they actually had an original woman, a black woman, who was supposed to be the original Rosa Parks. But as it turns out, she had illegitimate children or something like that, and some other issues that made her a really bad representative. So they just dropped her, and they picked up Rosa Parks instead. Interesting how the soldiers didn't disobey. Well, I mean, they were following procedural authority, right? They were, this is a liberal republic. It's governed according to the law. and they were given a lawful order. You can't disobey that order. So that's where we are. Loving versus Virginia case, just a white guy wanted to nut inside a black woman. Well, here's the thing, is that if you actually look at how miscegenation laws worked, I mean, on the books, it was supposed to legally prevent it in general, but in practice, there wasn't really, like, they didn't really enforce boundaries between white men and black women. Obviously, why would they? Because, the purpose behind the laws was to enforce boundaries around white women. It wasn't to enforce boundaries around white men, because if a white man conceives a mixed-race child with a black woman in America, in the American South, that child would just join the black population due to the one-drop rule. So it's not like it even made a difference in their minds, right? Because remember, it's not like they're thinking of this in some procedural fairness way, or like we need to mutually reinforce our boundaries of our, like, they were only concerned about the white population. Because that's, of course they would be. Why would they be concerned about anyone else, right? So. Yeah, I dislike your smugness and snarkiness and overall demeanor. I loathe you. Well, how about by the dashboard light? How do you even know that that's me if you've never actually interacted with me in person once? Not in person, but, like, I've never talked to you in any kind of VC. You have no idea what I'm like. You've constructed a conception of me based on me talking to a YouTube stream where I'm either solo or I'm talking with other people. Like you know nothing about me, which is fine. I mean, you can have that opinion if you want, but whatever. It's funny because I'd only heard about you from other people and I'd never watched your stuff. And I was just like, okay, it'd be interesting to talk to this guy because that's what I like to do. Then I find out you don't like me for some reason. No idea why. It's funny because, like, apparently the reason why I know about you now is because people were saying this sounds like Hell by the Dashboard Light. This sounds like, because I was coming around to certain things about Oofy Doofy theory. And I was like, yeah, it sounds to me like he was right and I was wrong about that. Concerning certain things. I can't remember the exact details, but I was like, yeah, he's probably right and I'm probably wrong about it then. Which is one of the reasons I wanted to originally talk to you, but whatever. Alabama allowed interracial marriage way past 2000. They just took it off the books in 2000. Yeah, that was entirely a practical thing. They, like, by the time that civil rights had passed, it didn't really matter whether there was laws in the books or not. In practice, they were not enforced. Because in order to enforce them, right, you would actually have to go into a marriage that was performed and then annul that marriage on that legal basis. So you'd actually have to intervene. It's not like a passive law. It would be an active law. They would have to intervene in it, so. I would argue that NEETs are better. Yes, unfortunately, I have a job. I used to be a NEET for a period of time, but I ran out of money and I had to get a job, unfortunately. Though the upside is it's kind of nice because it's a wagey job with a bunch of dudes. So, I mean, that's confirming my true self status, right? But I don't have to deal with HR anymore. I worked at one place and I literally got fired within 2 weeks. I mentioned it on my stream. Within 2 weeks, some brown chick was able to come up with a means to get me fired over completely frivolous means. I just got lucky that I was able to find something else because the job market is extremely bad right now. Voice pill. Yes, I am an internal voice cell. Yeah, there was one time I was able to get into a voice call with a woman, and the first thing she said is, "Oh my God, you sound like a teenage boy." I was like, fuck. I just said voice pilled again. The sphere of the internet is filled with deeply antisocial and hostile people. Yeah, maybe. I mean, look, I don't know. Maybe, because I'm looking at myself from my own perspective, right? There could be things that I do or say that I'm just not perceiving, and other people see it in a different way. So maybe there's truth to it. I don't know. Maybe there's truth to it. I don't intend to come across in a certain way, but well, I mean, it's true though. I mean, I do have like the voice of an adolescent boy. There's nothing I can do about it. It's just what it is. Maybe there is something I can do about it. Maybe if I get into chain smoking or something, maybe I can smoke max and bring my voice down. Unfortunately, vaping doesn't seem to do anything for it. But do you guys simp for Elliot Rodger? Can't say I do, no, because if I was Elliot Rodger, I would have gone to Asia with my millions of dollars from my family and like bought a condo or something and rented it out and then maybe bought another one. Who knows? I don't know. I would figure out some way to sustain a comfortable lifestyle in East Asia and then just get like a hot Chinese foid or something. Like if I was ER, because ER is a Hapa and he wasn't that bad looking either. He was just kind of autistic. Should have said you were a teenage boy. That would have probably benefited you. That's a good point, actually. I'm going to have to keep that one in mind. Collective Dismal have beef with you because you're a fence sitter. I don't know. I don't mind Collective Dismal. It's, yeah, I mean, I've only talked to him briefly. I don't have any issues with him. Or on my end, I don't have any issues with him. But, yeah. It's a shame because we're both Leafs. We're both stuck in Leaf hell, in manlet hell. So we should probably try and get along. ER should have used an M60. No, we condemn the Alta Vista atrocities with full force. These are crimes against humanity, especially crimes against blonde-haired bimbo humans, which we strictly, viscerally oppose. If you have HR in your company, don't interact with them unless super necessary. Unfortunately, I didn't have a choice because it was the Foyd that went to HR, not me. And then made up some bullshit about me. But I should have known better, though. I mean, it was my fault because I should have been super careful in interacting. I didn't take those precautions, and as a result, that was it. It's weird because I think what happened was I was sort of terminally online, and so I developed this sense from watching American social media that the woke stuff was actually receding and there was a lot of pushback. And then I just got brutally reminded that I'm in Canada where this is just like a total dictatorship. It's like, what were you thinking? And it's funny because the thing that got me fired was I won't get back into it because I talked about it in a previous stream, but it was me talking about how men and women, the physiological differences in our bodies over the course of a career, being like a welder or something, could possibly put strains on women's bodies that we don't know about yet because we don't have enough data. That's all I said. All right, which again, I know I shouldn't have now in hindsight, but that was a bridge too far. That was how dare you? Which is another one, which is why I'm like trans women are real women then. Like, why should I fight against the trans women that are competing in women's sports and taking advantage of female slots in DEI programs? Like, I can't even imply that men and women are physiologically different in any way, so I might as well just affirm the trannies. Because they're pissing off women anyways, right? Wait, if the Jews, Protestants, and Catholics were battling for influence, what did each group want? Also, who stood behind the Jews? The Protestants were in control, right? But they were losing control. Their control was weakening. And the Jews were coming up rapidly with influence, particularly in Hollywood and then increasingly in the legal system. Like, if you look at the NAACP and its founding, they did have like a black head representing them, but the bulk of the lawyers that were involved in legislating for causes the NAACP supported were Jewish lawyers. So it was very much a Jewish led organization, and there were even black intellectuals at the time that talked about it, like Harold Cruz. He wrote a book called Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, and that's exactly what he was talking about, that these Jews basically hijacked the black movement for their own interests. And of course their interest was they wanted to destroy the South, primarily, viscerally, because of what happened to Leo Frank, but then also secondarily because they saw it as the single biggest manifestation of white collective ethnocentric power, political power. So they wanted to break that, and they succeeded. You know, it turns out that was the correct gamble to make, because once the South was broken, Northern conservatism just collapsed. I mean, we've seen what's happened since then, right? Since the 60s and 70s, there was like Nixon was able to realign Catholics on the abortion issue, but then it just sort of devolved into Reagan neoliberal economics plus social conservatism and anti-communism, and none of that had any impact on the white men as a group, or white people as a group in America. They completely lost political relevance as a group. Like, basically nobody referenced them after that point. And that's the key issue, because they ceased to exist as a self-justifying group. Trannies ruined the LGBTQ and feminist movements. Yeah, you know what? I'm at the point now where I'm like, yeah, sounds like a wrinkle in the plan. It's kind of like when Muslims start establishing Sharia courts, and actually, there's a funny thing I'm going to post. Hold on. Here we are. You just made me think of this. When I see this, I'm just like, wow, maybe the future's not so bad. Maybe the future's actually bright.
Fucking hell. Here they come.
This is the future. This is the future clash for Britain. Clash between trans people and Muslims in Britain. See, these are why we should have supported the trannies in the beginning. They are our strongest soldiers. We're going to put them on the front line, and they're going to be bashing Muslims' heads in. Dude, Trudes hate their own looks match as well. Yeah, you know, I've heard that this is the case with gays generally. They really operate under the same parameters as straights do when it comes to selection, where you'll have like super high standards for the masculine gays, and then the feminine gays are all sort of clustered around the top 10% or something like that. I remember hearing about that. It just seems like the male versus female pattern just reproduces itself no matter what. It's quite funny. Look at those British men fighting the invaders. Hail Britannia. Hail victory. Yeah, when I saw this, I was like, oh God, there's no way I'm not going to have this on the stream. I'm going to find a way to squeeze this in contextually. Which I did. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You'd have femcells that unironically have sex with the troon as opposed to the average doofy off the street. You know what's funny? This is a pattern. Okay, I'm not saying it's common, but it's something that I've seen consistently now, where I've seen like teenage to maybe early 20s women, and they're not ugly either. They're like thin white girls, maybe with like a bit of a libtard punky aesthetic, but they'll be together with either another girl, and it's clear that they're in some kind of romantic entanglement just by the way that they're holding each other, or like a butch lesbian. And every time that I've seen this, both of them have been shorter than me. So I'm like, so the bull dykes actually mog me even if I'm taller than them. It's like, how do you compete? It's like, is that really the level that we're at now? It's fucking crazy. I put a massive smile on my face. You just know they voted for that. Yeah, we gotta start setting up Giga Tranny death squads where we'll send them to the East London districts, and they can just go all out with the Muslims, and then we can record it and put it on X and YouTube. That's what I've seen. That's what I've been myself. White women despise white men. That's a fact. Go out and look with your eyes or interact with white women. See, hell, this is something where I actually agree with you pretty much completely. I don't know if I would make it that absolute of a statement, but I generally agree with the gist of what you're saying. You know? And as a matter of fact, this is a position that I've moved towards. And this is one of the things that people have said. You sound like Hell by the Dashboard Light. Did you get that from Hell by the Dashboard Light? I said, no, I didn't watch his stuff, but he must be right. And I'll have to say he was correct on that. Right? Because I generally wouldn't make that statement in the past. I would try and be more general, but I have to say from what I've seen, I would say again, I try to bring up the bell curve just to be careful, I suppose. Where it's like, yeah, we're talking about a certain fraction of women, and it's the majority, but it's still you're still getting people on the tail ends, right? So I try to be careful with my statements, mostly just because I don't want people to then like pick them out of a stream and then say, Mercer said this ridiculous thing, here's why it's completely wrong, he's so stupid. You know, that's why I try and coach myself with cautious language. Trad transgenderism versus woke Islam. You know, it's got to be the name of a... maybe if we get enough of these kind of videos, I could do like a compilation series. Trad transgenderism versus woke Islam, and then fight compilation. And then we just have a bunch of these videos. Trump needs to allow trans people to enlist in the military again and send them to conquer the islands surrounding the strait and to take over Iran. Well, you know, they seem to be pretty vicious and bloodthirsty, so that's probably a good strategy, actually, thinking about it. And they seem to be much more willing to die, right? So maybe there's something to that. Yeah, I think that was actually the basis of the argument for bio-Leninism. This is like an old concept from back in the day. I think it was Cultured Thug that, and the idea is that like bio-Leninism is where you have a political movement that will cultivate like people that are incapable of functioning in normal society, and in exchange for allowing them to act the way that they want to act without the society reacting against them, they become like true believing loyal enforcers of the regime. That's bio-Leninism. And probably, I would not be surprised if you could get like a leftist government in control of the U.S., and if this leftist government could wipe out all opposition and just basically impose tranny communism on America, you could probably, like, they could probably do like some Trotskyist shit where they start invading other countries to spread this stuff, and you would probably see a lot of these trannies volunteering on the front lines for that. I wouldn't be surprised. The troons I've interacted with online are bigger radical feminists than the cis women. They got what they deserved. That's the funny thing. I have encountered these people as well. I encountered these people, and I thought that they were rad femmes. And what's weird is that I've found some TERFs, trans-exclusive rad feminists, that turned out to be trannies. I'm like, how does this even work? Like, how do you even square that cognitive dissonance? And I imagine that they just accept themselves out of that. But it's like this weird performative thing where most onogenophiles or autogynephilia, most of them are driven by like a desire to sexually mimic women. And so like when you see them act out what they think a woman is, it's usually like a totally bimbofied, highly sexual caricature. But there's another element that they get their satisfaction out of mimicking a feminist archetype. So like there's one of these troons who is like a hardcore rad femme. What's that name of that woman who wrote the book on conservative women? I can't remember her name, but like these they'll follow these like hardcore rad femmes from the 80s and 70s and 60s, and they'll like make their whole identity around radical feminist male exclusionary radical feminism, and then they're troons. And you realize like that's just the archetype that they're deriving satisfaction from mimicking. Yeah. Troons are liberal Reddit woman's strongest femcel legionnaires. Yeah, I mean, you start to get into real conflicts because they do like a lot of these trannies. Most of them, I would actually say, are not gay. Like they're heterosexual men, and they're sexually attracted to women. They might performatively pretend to be like a homosexual man for the fetish, but if you actually look at what they desire, they typically want women the same way that straight men do. And then this is the predatory element. This is where you find them like preying on children or surprise snuggling women, that sort of stuff. You know, there are cases where these guys will get arrested for some kind of sex crime. They will go to jail, and then they will get themselves transferred to a female prison, and then they'll be caught raping women in the female prison. I just said the R word. But, yeah. You need to fix the negative tolerance policies, them being accepting of oofy doofies, and the problem with dismissive avoidance first for them to be truly acceptable. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. Sorry, we got 50% casualty rates of our units, but they haven't even hit the front lines. Yeah, I remember that joke on 4chan. It was a good one. Powerful sage yet again contradicting himself, and he's not white, so why is he complaining? I don't know, are you talking about me? Because I was certified. There's a guy living in Sweden, and he knows what I look like, and he certified me as an ethnic. So I'm not actually white, because I don't have blonde hair and blue eyes. So I am, in fact, an ethnic. I'm calling it now. First FAFO moment when someone tries to invade a data center will be a trans woman who hates AI, took their 3D art or design job. Maybe, but like, how do you invade a data center though? Because it's one thing to go into a building and shoot people, right? It's another thing to like sabotage a data center where you'd have to like destroy all the infrastructure, right? So I think that's you might be right about that. Actually, I would say if there's anyone that would do that, it would be a troon, because they have the motivation, and there's also enough of them that are intelligent enough to do that. But I would say that would be a much higher threshold than just shooting people. You know, just there would be a lot more planning and logistics involved, and a lot more competence. You know, it's definitely possible though. I could see it. Yeah. Complete male victory, then. Even arrested women can't escape real women. Yeah, this is total male victory. We all gotta become trans women, and then we're basically unstoppable. I have actually said that, and I stand by it. I don't know if it works anymore. I think it probably still works in Canada. Probably does not work in the US anymore. But like during peak woke, identifying as a trans woman just on your ID card, and then using that to get through algorithmic filters if you're applying for jobs or you're applying for internships or you're trying to get into university, there's good reason to do that. And you don't have to change anything else about yourself. If they say, well, you don't look like a woman, you can say, excuse me, are you telling me women's supposed to look a certain way? I mean, it's plausible to me. There was actually a guy who did this in Canada, where he changed his gender identity on his driver's license to female. And the reason he did that was because women get lower insurance rates than men do for car insurance. And he was actually able to get a lower insurance rate by identifying as a woman. He didn't change anything about himself. He just changed his sex to female on his driver's license. So I don't think it works anymore, but during peak woke, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons why there's a pullback, obviously there was a lot of behavioral issues, but one of the reasons there's a pullback is because this gender identity stuff is a fracture point where men could exploit it to circumvent the DEI policies that are imposed on them, right? So, and that's also the reason why trans race was never permitted by liberals. Like if you think about it, if transgenderism is possible, there's no reason why transracialism couldn't be possible too. Like if we're operating within the same mental framework. But they knew the reason why, like they understood on a concrete level that if they allowed transracialism, that it would open the door for people to scam their way around all the DEI policies, which is why it was never allowed. I have too much pride to identify as a trans woman to get jobs. I just can't do it. Indians probably will, though. Well, there was that Indian guy who got busted because he identified as black in order to get into medical school, but he got busted for it. I think he was related to a politician or something. It's pretty funny. Sir, I am African American. Wait, wasn't there also an HS shop teacher from Canada who wore gigantic silicone tits and wigs and said it was a woman? Yes, there was. And to this day, I'm not sure if that was actually a LARP or if he was genuine about it. Because I've heard conflicting reports. I've heard that the whole thing was basically to demonstrate the absurdity of the system that's in place. But I've also heard from other people that this is like a sincere thing, that he's basically just a pervert. So I'm not sure which is true. But that did happen. That was in Southern Ontario. I say non-binary is the best route. I knew an NB person in college who was just a leftist 6 foot tall guy with a beard, but would get triggered if you use he him pronouns. Yeah, maybe, but I'm not sure. Like, do you get through the same way with NB as you do with being identified as a woman? I'd have to examine that a little more closely. They were expecting a woman or trans woman and got your average manlet. Yeah, I mean, there you go, right? I mean, that's how women treat me, right? So, whatever. I might as well just take advantage of it. Or at least that would be my thinking, but nowadays, I'm pretty sure it doesn't work anymore. Pro-soldiers in Spain also officially identify as women to get better conditions in the army and more pay bonuses. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Integrating armies is insane. But you can tell a country is not a serious military if they integrate women into the armies. And like a contrary example that people might point to is Israel, but I would actually use Israel as an example of proof. Like the Israeli ground forces are a complete joke. Like nobody, like they pretty much lose every conflict that they get into on the ground. The IDF. The major power center for the Israeli military is their air force. That's where they're able to deal devastating damage. The ground forces are basically a joke. They're basically an occupation army after they've completely decimated an area with their air force. My university was giving scholarship money for being gay. How do you even prove that? Like, do you have to show up and like make out with another dude to prove that you're gay? Or is it just like a trust-based system? Like, how does that even work? Wait, so Canada's strongest soldier is going to be trans woman versus Indian menace and Muslim. Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I hadn't really thought about it, but it would be... Well, we don't have that many trins up here, actually. We don't. I actually think in Canada, the main conflict is going to be between the Sikhs and the Hindus. And Muslims will also be part of it, but it'll primarily be Sikhs versus Hindus. What country doesn't include women in their army? Even the DPRK does. Well, no, there's a difference between including women in your army and integrating them into the army. So you can have women fulfill certain roles in your military and it's fine. If you integrate them into your combat roles, like ground forces combat roles, it's a total disaster. It just destroys morale. It destroys group cohesion because men are just psychologically predisposed to try and protect women. So when a woman is under fire, men will do things to try and save them that they would not otherwise do for another man and jeopardize missions. Like, it's just an extremely stupid system. And no military that has their military integrated is serious. And intelligence, they're carrying Israel geopolitical interests. Yes, intelligence is another huge asset. If we're talking, though, the actual fighting element of it, though, it would be their Air Force. That's really what's key for them. Their Air Force and also their covert operations, which is connected to their intelligence, right? Wait, don't Muslims force feminize their gay men? Yeah, they actually do. Well, they kind of have like a Greek-style relationship to homosexuality where it's defined by who's doing the who's on the receiving end versus not. So you sort of become you're either a man or a woman based on being on the receiving or giving end, and so this is the logic they use to feminize the men. That's my understanding, anyways. Award importing clan feud from fourth world to the first world. Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting because I can tell you, growing up in Ottawa, it was like 80% white when I was growing up. So it was mostly white people, and then we had about 20% immigrant population, but they were selected for... They were good representatives of their population. And there was whites that were buffering them. So it wasn't like they were all... like right up beside each other. There was these buffer whites in between them that acted as like intermediaries or buffer, as I said. Nowadays, the whites have sort of been driven out of these cities. I'm not sure how Ottawa is demographically because I haven't been there in years, but I could tell, like, right before COVID, which is when I left, I could tell that the demographics were shifting rapidly. And now you're getting a situation where all these minority groups, or minorities, I mean, they're a global majority, but all these non-white populations are now crushed up against each other. There's no whites in between them that are sort of occupying the space between them so they're not directly interacting with each other. Now they are. And you're starting to see these clashes become commonplace. Where it's like Indians versus Chinese, versus Latin American versus Muslim versus black. And without any whites in the middle, the state really has a problem because they, like, typically if you look at how Western liberal states work, like if it's a white versus minority conflict, they're going to side with the minority, right? They're going to punish the white. What do you do when it's minority versus minority? It becomes a much more difficult situation to manage because they view both of these groups as members of their political alliance, political coalition. So oftentimes they're just sort of paralyzed on what they can do. It's an interesting situation, and that's going to become more common as time goes on, as they start vying for control. Muslims hate gays but like lesbians and trans women. Well, lesbians don't exist, so It's not a real thing. Trans women, yeah, I don't know. Maybe. I'm no expert on that. I haven't really read much into it. So. It's strange since there are Muslim countries that are okay with transgender people as long as they don't have romantic sexual connections with people of their new gender. Yeah, I mean, you kind of see a similar thing with Thailand. Like, people have this stereotype about Thailand being this, like, total degenerate giant brothel, like, giant red light district. It's not. It's, like, they have a red light district that they just acknowledge as existing. And they also have a lot of trans women, but it's, like, separate from mainstream society. So you have the mainstream Thai society, which is relatively conservative, at least by Western standards. It's relatively conservative, and then you have the prostitutes and the trans women or ladyboys, whatever, and they're a completely separate section of society. There's no real interaction between these two sections. They just sort of keep themselves separate, and this seems to work for them. It seems to be a much more workable solution than what we have, where it's like we try and force each group to, the conservatives, obviously, they attempt to suppress the homosexuals and police them. And now we have a reversion of that, where they're attempting to integrate homosexuals and these other groups into the mainstream straight society, and is actually corrupting and deforming the mainstream straight society due to these forced normalizations of their behavior. So it's like a back and forth problem. When the clean solution is just separation, that seems to work better than what we're doing now. But lesbians are just uppity foids. Yeah, pretty much. Lesbians aren't real because women can do anything with a woman and still be seen as straight. But if you're a man and you hold hands one time with a guy, you're gay for life. Yes, that's because male and female sexuality is different. Male sexuality is very object-oriented. It's very outwardly focused. And it's also very energetic and intense. Female sexuality is receptive and not very intense at all. This is why if you dig into the lesbian community, you realize, I think it's like 3/4 of self-described lesbians have been in sexual and romantic relationships with men. 3/4. And something like 18% of self-described lesbians are married to men, or currently married to men. Okay, and they come up with all these weird copes to justify it, why they have sex with and marry men. And they have, like, it's called comp het, which is like compulsory heterosexuality. And the reality is gay men face way more stigma than lesbian women. Like, lesbian women, there's almost no stigma attached to them, really. I mean, there's like mockery, certain negative stereotypes associated with them, but it's not an actual hostility. Whereas with gay men, they're quite intensely disliked and they're viewed with great suspicion, right? There's far more social cost to being identified as gay as a man than being identified as lesbian as a woman. But lesbians, or alleged lesbians, come up with all these justifications for their sexual escapades with men. And if you actually dig into their communities, there's this huge perpetual war between the self-described gold star lesbians, which are women that have only had sexual romantic relationships with women, and then the rest of them, which is the majority of them. The gold stars are basically like, it's weird, they kind of treat it the same way that a lot of guys will treat virginity in a woman. They sort of view it in a similar way, and they view women that have had relationships with men as contaminated. It's and it's very funny. It's if you ever dig into how they interact with each other, like their own little communities, you realize these aren't serious. These aren't serious women. As a matter of fact, there's a concept called political lesbianism. Political lesbianism is about like women that are not actually lesbians, that are sexually attracted to men and not women, but who are choosing to engage in lesbian activity as a political act of feminism. Could you imagine the corollary of that, of like a straight man who is attracted to women and not men voluntarily choosing to engage in gay lifestyle and gay relationships with other men for some political reason? It's absurd. It's ridiculous. Like, it's unimaginable, right? So the whole thing is it's just not an... Males and females have very different sexuality. Women basically do not have that kind of driving, difficult to ignore sexual urge that men have. It just doesn't exist for them in the same way. I want to avoid saying it doesn't exist at all, because I'm sure you could point to examples of it existing. Like, yeah, okay, they'll get horny, especially, with their periods and whatever. But it's nowhere near the constant slow burn frustration that men deal with, right? And that produces different outcomes, Which is why if a woman dabbles with other women for whatever reason, it's very likely that she is actually attracted to men and she's just doing this for some other reason. Whereas if a man is dabbling with other men, that is a red flag that he is actually most likely gay and pretending to not be, or pretending to be bisexual or straight. Like, that's the reason why. And it's because of how the sexualities are different. Lesbians are women traumatized by ex-boyfriends. They cope and pretend they're attracted to women. Well, it's ex-boyfriends. It's also like other male figures in their lives. Could be fathers. You see this with a lot of black women. Like, there's a lot of black women that self-identify as political lesbians in America. I think part of it is cope, because it's like, when you imagine a black political lesbian, like, the image of the woman that comes to mind is probably very accurate. Like, whatever the image is that immediately pops in your mind. It's not like a Kimberly Classic looking black chick, right? Both women and men have no standards for women. That's why les is accepted. Actually, that's one of the big issues. Is it's so easy, and this is something that self-identified lesbians and bisexual women will talk about, is that men are so much easier to date as a woman that it becomes much more preferable for them, even if they have some kind of attraction to women. It's just so difficult to date a woman that they say, just guys are just like, I don't have to do anything. I just have to dress nicely and exist in an area, and I will have men all giving me attention. Like, that's what they'll say. It's like, yeah, well, I can't blame them. I can't blame them for that logic. Where are men gay, though? I don't know. There's a lot of speculation about that. We could see what male sexuality is like without women mediating it by looking at gay men, right? It's not pretty, a lot of diseases, a lot of really bizarre, perverse behavior. So it's also why I'm kind of pessimistic about AI girlfriends or whatever, or AI android waifu bots, even though I made a video about it. Like, the reason why when I made my video on China, I talked about how it would be the only way that you could have, like, you could replace women reproductively and in society would be through like a state-controlled enterprise. Because otherwise men would just become complete goon cells that would just destroy themselves with the most insane perversions they could imagine, right? On demand. Unless you have like a centralized control of the AI of these robots that can enforce boundaries on behavior. That's the biggest problem with men. So women, in that sense, the good thing about women is that they're kind of like a distributed version of that, where they impose boundaries, or they should, in theory, if you have like the ideal setup, they would impose sexual boundaries on male sexual behavior, but they would do it in a distributed way, so it's not like it's centrally controlled by a government. It's not like the government's programming women to all impose these values on these men. It's like a decentralized thing. Whereas if you were to have like an AI, centralized government-controlled AI waifu bot network, that would give the government basically control of the entire family. Like, it would be totally dystopian, right? Be like more extreme than anything 1984 or Brave New World tier, right? Makes more sense to be a lesbian because women are hot, yet gay men make no sense. Why find men attractive? I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. I couldn't imagine. I don't understand it because I'm not, but clearly there's guys that are like that, right? At least for me, I'm like, I don't understand the appeal, like I like things that are soft, smell nice, and squishy, and neotenous, long hair. I don't understand, but whatever. Yeah, black women have a high lesbian rate. They call themselves studs and they dress like hood black men. Yeah. I've seen some videos about that. That's really funny. It's definitely coping. But then again, I mean, it's to be fair to them. Like, black social culture in America is really fucked up. Like, there's, like, including for women. So I can kind of understand why they're like that psychologically. But yeah, it's not surprising. Do you like things that are soft, Mercer? Oh boy, do I have something for you. Oh boy, what do you have for me? We need to pair wolf with a stud. Yeah, there you go. That's like a genetic recombination, right? Because presumably the stud would be like a masculine black woman, like a what was her name? Teresa Williams or Williams tennis player. Serena Williams, that's it. Serena Williams. Serena Williams is like a Giga Tyrone machine. She's like a Giga Tyrone factory, right? Like, and it's funny because her husband is like this really noodly looking soy white guy. But whatever creatures they produce, if they produce sons, the sons are going to mog their father so unbelievably hard, it's going to be hilarious. So maybe there's something to that. But yeah, that's like Serena Williams tier Giga Tyrone Foids. D1 athlete factories, right? I don't know, dude. I mean, I couldn't do it, but I'm so like, dude, look at this. Look at this face. Like, come on. Like, that's not even a dude's face. That's an ugly dude's face, right? That's like an ogre dude's face. But yeah. A lot of men being gay because they can't get cheeks, so they develop an attraction to whatever they can get. I don't know. I mean, I'm not so sure about that. Because, like, I've seen multiple cases. I actually know about this. It's a rather sad case. It's an area where I'm sympathetic to the woman. I knew of this woman in my mother's best friend's family, who was a very devout Catholic, and she really believed in no sex before marriage. She married a guy, and then it turns out it was basically a lavender marriage for him. He was a gay dude, and there was basically no sex at all. And she actually divorced over the fact that there was no sex. And she dropped her religion, because obviously if you're a trad Catholic, you cannot divorce. But I mean, at that point then I'm like, well, it's pretty shitty. I am actually quite sympathetic to her. But so that does happen, where there'll be dudes that will date women just for the appearance of being straight in order to avoid detection, but they're on the down low, as they say. She is hot. I would breed her. Well, you know, I'm sure that there's not much competition for women that look like this, okay? Look, I know that black women are kind of an easy target because they do get... And actually, this is something that annoys me about the online right, is that they're always shitting on ethnic women and comparing them unfavorably to white women in appearance. And like they're just always talking about how ugly this race of woman is or that race of woman is. And it fucking annoys me because like this, like there are women that could potentially be sympathetic to your circumstances, but because this group of men is shitting on them all the time in order to try and win over, and it doesn't even work because white women find that kind of repulsive behavior too. Like they find it creepy and weird. Like there'll be these threads where it'll be some black guys talking about how beautiful black women are. Like it'll be like black gnats or something, or black like pro-black types that will post pictures of attractive black women and be like, our beautiful black queens. And then you'll have these fucking white nationalists go into those threads and say, no, look at this picture of this attractive white woman. She's much more attractive than that black woman. You should find this woman more attractive. And I'm like, dude, first of all, any white woman that sees this will be immediately creeped out by it. Okay? Like she'll find that kind of disgusting and weird. And all you're doing is you're creating a reservoir of hostility towards us because they think we hate them. Which is, you know what? You can do that if you want, but that makes it worse for the rest of us who end up getting tarred with this brush. Right? That's something that pisses me off. The Urukai, like that one shot Boromir. Yeah, I mean, she is. Look, that's genuinely a facially ugly woman. Let's just be honest. You know, it's not even that it's her black features that are ugly. She's just absurdly masculine, right? That's the problem. I noticed that the D1 black chick athletes were never around guys, while the white chicks always seem to be dating someone. We need to hook up Wolf with a D1 shot putter or jumper. Well, a lot of those types of women, they're not going to date like an average black guy, right? But at the same time, the kind of black guys that would be in their league, so to speak, which would be like their male equivalents, which would be the D1 athlete black guys, they're overwhelmingly either going to be dating white women or mixed women that are not athletes but are light-skinned and attractive, right? So they end up with it, and obviously it's a lot harder for black women to date non-black men, right? So they end up kind of screwed in that way. There's one thing you notice is that if you look at fertility by IQ cohort, I know it's not exactly the same as athletics, but if you look at IQ cohort fertility, black women with an IQ, I think it's like 115 plus IQ black women, have among the lowest fertility rates among any group of women. And we're not even talking like it's just relatively lower. It's like the difference levels off for white and Asian women and Hispanic women after about like 105 IQ. It pretty much levels off after that point. For black women, it actually dives. It takes a nosedive down like 30% lower. And yeah, it's unfortunate for them. Women don't see race in their gyno hive mind. Saying Serena Williams is not as ugly is not a compliment to other women, but an insult to all women. Yeah, that's how they see it. And they just see it as, because the way, here's something that you'll notice, okay? Women in general are much more comfortable attacking a man's height than attacking his looks. And it's not because height is so central. I think this is a miscommunication a lot of guys get. It's not because height is super central to their attraction. It is important. It's a key component, but it's not the only thing. It's not like the number one thing that matters. You would get the impression that it is based on how much women shit on manlets in social media. But there's a reason for this. The reason that they do that is because unlike height, which is only a male flaw, because women can be short, women can be tall, and men are typically attracted to any height of woman outside of maybe super extreme outliers, right? Like there's a niche for tall women, there's a niche for short women. So it doesn't really matter what their height is. But for looks, I mean, there's ugly men and then there's ugly women, right? So if a woman is attacking a man for being ugly, another woman who is ugly or even just uglier than the woman that's attacking the ugliness could perceive this as her judging the man's, like, seeing ugliness as something innately wicked or bad or of low value. And this, like, if you look at how women interact with each other, they're very, very keen on avoiding looking judgmental towards each other and on looking like bad people towards each other or mean towards each other. And so they will be very cautious about attacking things that could be perceived as, well, there are ugly women too. So you're saying that ugliness is something low value and like ugly people should hate themselves. Is that what you're saying? Versus, oh, he's short, I'm going to make fun of him for being short. Well, short women are just perfectly fine with that because short women have no issues, you know? So I think that's the main reason why you see it's such a focus on attacking height, because it's like a free card to hit men, and there's no blowback on women that share this trait, right? It's probably also true for Asian men, because like attacking Asian men as being dorky or unmasculine or whatever other negative stereotypes. Asian women don't suffer from the negative stereotypes associated with Asians, really. I mean, they don't. Like, it's that, like, the main issue with Asians is not even necessarily that Asian men are seen as really unattractive. I mean, okay, yeah, they are to some extent, but it's really the asymmetry between Asian men and Asian women that is really extreme. And Asian women are pretty much able to compete close to white women in terms of competing for men. Asian men are at a significant disadvantage. As a result, attacking Asianness or Asian men, like for the stereotypes associated with them, probably carries a lot less sting for Asian women. Whereas if you look at like Indians, for example, if you attack Indians for their negative stereotypes, you know, oh, you're short, you're ugly, negative cultural stereotypes, whatever, that has blowback on the women because there's pretty much no asymmetry between Indian women and Indian men. They're pretty much equally desirable or undesirable. And so I think that it's much more difficult to attack them. But Asian men are an easy target as a result of that. Do women have an equivalent to being short? No, they don't. No, they don't. There's no equivalent. Because it's not... I mean, the only equivalent you could maybe come up with is like looking excessively masculine, kind of like Serena Williams. But that is more filtered into ugliness than shortness. Like, shortness is kind of a unique factor. Like, you can't really map a female counterpart onto that. I'm short, and it's only been white women that made fun of my height. Black women like me regardless, even though they're a foot taller than me. Like, black women at my job love me. It depends on how short you are, right? Like, I would say if you're 5'6" to, like, 5'6" and above, I would say that's, like, the lower limit to when you probably won't get shit on in society. Unless you're in, like, the Netherlands or something. If you're in, like, Canada or the UK or the US. If you're 5'6" and above... You'll be okay in society. Like, you won't necessarily get ridiculed in public. Doesn't mean you'll have any dating prospects. But below 5'6", that's when you start, like, it really actually affects your life in other ways outside of dating, right? Asian women get flack for dating white guys. Kind of. The thing is, I mean, I hear that they apparently get flack for it, but when I actually look at how they interact on social media, it's more like they're humble bragging. Like, what they seem to like to do is be like, oh, this yellow fever is so horrible. I can't believe I'm being fetishized by all of these white men. Oh, it's awful. And really, what is she saying? She's saying, oh, I'm seen as sexually attractive by all these different men. Like, that's what it comes down to. It's just an intersexual competition, right? It's kind of like when women will post about... There was this one Hispanic woman that posted a picture of herself with her blonde-haired, blue-eyed white baby. And she said, I thought my indigenous features would come out, but I just end up looking like his nanny. What's the implication? And she's posting a picture where she looks like she's kind of rolling her eyes a little bit, where it's kind of like, oh my God. But then when you realize is she's just bragging. She's just using it as a brag. She's saying, oh, it's so horrible that my child is so fair-skinned, blue-eyed, and blonde-haired. Oh, it's so... He doesn't look anything like me. He looks like his Dolph Lundgren Giga Chad father. Oh, it's so horrible. Like, it's what I think a lot of it is. Yo, I was here at 164 subs. I was in your Discord, my Indian balls. Okay, just DM me. I'll talk to you. Anybody can get into my Discord if you've been in my chats for long enough. You just have to do a voice confirmation on in the prospect section. You just got to talk on voice with either me or a mod, just to confirm that you're a real person, basically, and that you're not. Because that filters out a surprising number of people. And as long as you can do a voice, just a quick voice interaction, and then you've either have somebody in the server already that can vouch for you, or you know somebody, or rather you've been interacting in the chat for a consistent period of time, for a couple streams. That's good enough. And you can find the link to my Discord in the description. You know, girls under 5 feet get rejected way more than a girl that is average height, like 5'5". I don't know, maybe. I'm not so sure about that. Because they tend to have wider dating options, right? Like, my mother is a foidlet. She's like 5'1". And if I just look at her dating history after my parents' divorce, like, she dated guys ranging from 5'4" to 6'4", right? So she had a much wider... Like, she actually didn't really discriminate based on height. And she had a much wider range of options for men to choose from. And as a result, I mean, she wasn't single for long. She ended up remarried pretty fast. That's one of the major advantages that these women have, right? Asian women love white men based on my experience. I keep hearing that, but they don't seem to like me. So I can't really speak on that. I respect the vetting you have in the Discord server. It keeps it mostly clean and coherent. Yeah, a disgraced liberal. I remember you on the, I think it was the Thomas White show, so I knew you were legit. So that was good. Most people are going to have to go through the vetting just because, you know, if you're not somebody who's a regular in our circles, you know, it's a little bit different. I'm practically a woman, a midget, and I got a woman's number at work the other day. She's a black single mother, but I promised to take her out in a couple days. Wish me luck, guys. Good luck, man. Good luck. That's good to hear. I mean, you know, as long as you're realistic about life, like, you'd be surprised how happy people can be if they just sort of accept their circumstances and they adjust their expectations. And I don't mean you should do that for everything, but for some things, it can help a lot with avoiding being resentful about life, right? So, how do small pee-pee men marry big booty black women? It ain't gonna fit. I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask them, but you know, black queen maxing. I don't know. There's one day where I was at my local mall and I saw like 6 interracial couples where it was either a white man with a black woman or it was a black woman with obviously mixed race kids. And it was like, this is why I'm careful about anecdotes, because if I had just drawn any conclusions from that single day, I would have concluded there's like an epidemic of oil drilling going on in my city. But it's like, no, that just happens to be a really weird scenario where there was a bunch of them at once. You know, I would still say the general tendency is more white women with black men than the reverse. I don't think it's as extreme here as it is in the U.S. because African women seem to be a lot easier to deal with behaviorally. But, yeah. I personally feel like limiting my time on Instagram has been biggest shift towards having a more realistic expectation for what I want out of my life, which enables me to at least feel progression. It was a big issue. I've heard a lot of people complain about Instagram. I managed to avoid it because I got banned. I literally made an account using my Reginald Mercer Gmail. And within 2 days, I didn't even post anything. I didn't follow anyone. Within 2 days, I got permabanned. I was like, wow, am I that powerful already? Is this my power level now? So. Nogs love to hang around Walmart-style shops. Maybe. I don't know. I will say this. Like, blacks in general get along actually really well from what I can see with the whites here. Like, the only immigrant group that I see really hanging around a lot with whites, and I'm talking like the teenagers, are blacks. And I don't mean like black guys just trying to hang around with white girls to try and score them. I mean like 90% of the time, it'll be white boys hanging out with black boys, and they're just sort of going and doing something, like teenagers. And then sometimes you'll also see white girls hanging around with black girls. I would say it's more common to see the boys hang out than the girls. So they don't seem to have the problems with integration that the Indians do. Like, Indians form like a parallel society. Like, they're almost completely separate. Like, they just don't interact with us. We don't interact with them. They have their own parallel world that they engage in. It's kind of strange. Did you register without a phone number? Instagram allowed me to register without a number, then banned me for not adding one within a couple days. I don't recall. I'm pretty sure they said that it was due to some sort of content violation, which is weird because I never posted any content or even interacted with anything. I just made it because I was going to use it to find content. Never really got into it. And then I got an email saying I was banned. It's like, okay, whatever. Probably seeing more high-income black immigrants. Well, I mean, there is the selection effect because in order to get to Canada, you need to afford a passport, afford a plane ticket, and enough money to support yourself while you're here, right? And also, presumably, if they're using the student visa method, they have to afford the student visa or the education costs, right? So that's going to select for higher income, like elite Africans. So they're probably, in terms of their average IQ, they're probably pretty similar to the whites that they're hanging out with, maybe even a little higher. And the dog is barking. Actually, this is probably a good time to call it because I also need to use the bathroom. Dog is getting mad. So, and right now we're just sort of going on anecdote, but no, it's good fun. Anyways, guys, I will talk to you all later. You have a great rest of the weekend.